Forget what the news told you. They spun a tale of terrorism, of coordinated attacks. They lied. Because when American cities plunged into darkness, when the screams began to echo from torn-apart streets under a blood-soaked moon, it wasn't human. It was ancient. It was vengeance incarnate with eyes of fire and claws of steel. And the only man who knew its impossible name, the one haunted by its first hunt, was about to face the nightmare again, because some truths refused to stay buried. Listen closely, because this isn't the story they told you on the evening news. This isn't about some rogue cell of extremists, or a collective delusion, or any of the neat, tidy lies meant to tuck you back into a comfortable sleep. This is about the night the world cracked open and something primordial, something terrifyingly ancient, spilled out. It began subtly enough, in the way truly seismic events often do. A flickering of lights in Seattle, then a complete blackout that swallowed the city whole. Simultaneously, a police scanner in Portland crackled to life with screams, abruptly cutting off as if devoured by static. Then, the reports started piling in, not isolated incidents, but a pattern emerging from the deepening shadows. It was the first night of the full moon, a luminous orb hanging high above the Pacific Northwest, casting long, deceptive shadows. But this wasn't a night for lovers or stargazers. This was a night for hunters. The first bodies were found at dawn, in alleys, on rooftops, in what were once bustling marketplaces. They weren't just dead. They were shredded, limbs torn, torsos ripped open with a grotesque precision that defied any known weapon. The sheer, impossible violence of it made veteran first responders vomit on the pristine city streets. This wasn't human. No knife, no bomb, no known beast could do this. Panic at first was a low hum, drowned out by official pronouncements of coordinated terror attacks. They tried to sell us that line, even as the scale of the horror expanded. Night 2. The moon, fuller, more menacing, rose over Denver and Chicago. This time, the attacks were bolder, faster. Police precincts were overwhelmed in minutes, their defenses crumbling like wet paper. Systems failed en masse, traffic lights dying, cell towers going silent, the digital veins of the city severing themselves one by one at the stroke of midnight. It was as if some unseen hand was pulling the plug, plunging entire metropolises into a pre-industrial darkness, a canvas perfect for unspeakable acts. Imagine the horror. You're huddled in your home, the streetlights outside extinguished, the hum of the refrigerator gone, the only sound the frantic thumping of your own heart. Then the distant screams, closer now, echoing off the concrete canyons, carrying an intensity that turned your blood to ice. The power outages weren't just random. They were strategic. They were the monster's way of blinding us, making us vulnerable, bringing the hunt back to its most primal form. The authorities, caught flat-footed, scrambled. Their terror alerts felt hollow, their rhetoric flimsy. They had no answers. They were operating in the dark, quite literally, searching for a ghost with claws. And then the first undeniable proof slipped through the cracks. A grainy, shaky phone video, uploaded moments before a city's network collapsed, went viral in the brief window it had. It showed a fleeting glimpse illuminated by a car's exploding headlight. It wasn't a man in a mask. It wasn't a paramilitary outfit. It was something else entirely. Massive, bipedal, covered in dark, matted fur. Its frame rippled with unnatural muscle, moving with a speed that blurred the edges of the frame. But it was the eyes that burned themselves into the collective consciousness. 2 pinpricks of malevolent crimson, glowing with an infernal light. And then, the steel glinting in the dark. Not weapons held, but claws, wickedly long and impossibly sharp. The video cut out with a sound that could only be described as tearing flesh. The official response shifted from denial to outright alarm. National Guard units were mobilized, cities put on lockdown, but it felt like closing the barn door after the wolf had already slaughtered the flock. The world held its breath. The news anchors, their voices strained, spoke of an unprecedented threat, carefully avoiding the word creature. They showed the edited, sanitized footage, but the true terror had already gone viral. People were locking their doors, but they knew, instinctively, that wood and steel would offer little protection against something that could rip a police cruiser in half. And as the sun dipped below the horizon on the third day, the moon, now a bloated, malevolent eye, began its ascent. The next few hours would decide everything. Would it strike again? Would the pattern hold? The dread was a palpable thing, a collective gasp held across a nation. No one knew what was coming. But one man, far from the panic, living with his own ghosts, had seen it before, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that it was coming again. Mason Wolfe lived in the quiet, almost sterile solitude of a cabin tucked deep within the Carolina pines. It was a place designed for forgetting, for burying the kind of memories that clawed at your sanity in the dead of night. He was a ghost, a legend whispered among the few who knew what he truly was. A sniper, retired from special forces, whose precision was as legendary as the black marks in his service record. Those marks weren't for insubordination. They were for missions so classified, they ceased to exist the moment they were completed. Missions that left more than just commendations or dishonors. They left scars. His days were a ritual of austerity, early runs, the methodical cleaning of weapons he hoped he'd never have to fire again, the silent sips of black coffee, and the endless aching quiet. The only sound for miles was the wind through the pines, or the occasional distant cry of a hawk, sounds that mirrored the stark emptiness within him. He kept his body honed, a machine tuned for a purpose it no longer served, or so he told himself. His face, etched with lines that spoke of too many sleepless nights, was a study in controlled emotion. But in his eyes, if you looked closely enough, you could see it. The deep, unsettling quiet of a man who had seen too much. He wore no medals. The ones he'd earned he'd either given away or buried in a forgotten box. They were symbols of a life he'd shed, a uniform he no longer fit into. He was Mason Wolfe, and he was nobody. Or at least, that's what he desperately wanted to be. The first tremor of the outside world breaking through his carefully constructed fortress was the news. He didn't watch much, but the sheer scale of the terror was unavoidable. He saw the grainy footage, the official spin, the bewildered faces of analysts trying to fit an impossible anomaly into a neat, digestible box. He saw the crimson eyes in the leaked video, the impossible claws, and a cold certainty began to settle in his gut. A familiarity that turned his blood to ice. He'd seen that particular brand of impossible before. He'd lived it. Then the summons came. Not a call, not an email. An old, beat-up, dark-colored sedan, the kind that blends into any suburban street, pulled up his gravel driveway. Two men in crisp, dark suits emerged. They didn't identify themselves beyond government. They didn't need to. Mason knew. The kind of knowledge they sought could only come from the shadows, from the places where things went horribly, terrifyingly wrong. They didn't ask if he wanted to come. They stated it. Captain Wolfe, the nation needs your unique expertise. The phrase hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Mason didn't resist. He simply nodded, his face unreadable. He'd known this day might come, perhaps even subconsciously braced for it. The beast he thought he'd escaped, the one that haunted his nightmares, was loose again. And deep down, he knew he was the only one who truly understood its monstrous nature. He packed a single worn duffel bag, a few changes of clothes, his old meticulously cleaned sniper rifle, disassembled of course, but his fingers still remembered the feel of every component, and a small tarnished dog tag. It wasn't his. It belonged to a man he'd loved like a brother. A man who died horribly, impossibly, in the darkest reaches of the Appalachian night. That was the secret he carried, the wound that never truly healed. He stepped out of the cabin, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, a stark contrast to the darkness gathering in his soul. The men in suits were already waiting by the car, their faces grim, their patience thin. He got in without a word, the heavy silence of the cabin replaced by the stifling quiet of the sedan. The classified facility was miles away, Hours of driving in the pre-dawn dark. Mason closed his eyes, bracing himself. He knew what awaited him. More blurry images, more frantic analysis, and the desperate, unspoken plea for answers he wasn't sure he possessed. But then, as the car pulled onto the highway, one of the men handed him an encrypted tablet. "Briefing materials, Captain." Mason took it, his fingers tracing the cold metal. He unlocked it, the screen flickering to life. The first few files were what he expected: casualty reports, structural damage assessments, failed attempts at containment. But then, a series of photographs loaded. Still frames from the leaked video, enhanced, sharpened. And there it was, the monstrous silhouette, the impossible bulk, the glint of those wicked claws. And the eyes, the burning, intelligent, malevolent red eyes. A shiver, not of fear, but of profound, bone-deep dread ran down Mason's spine. It wasn't just a creature. It was the creature. The very same nightmare that had ripped his world apart years ago. He felt the cold touch of a ghost on his skin, a ghost that had just announced its return. The cabin was a lifetime away, but the Appalachians were always present. They lived in Mason's mind, a jagged, shadowy range of peaks where the air hung heavy with the scent of pine and decay, and the darkness held more than just trees. This wasn't just a scar. It was a brand, burned onto his soul. It had been years ago, a mission so deep black, its very existence was a whispered rumor. An abandoned Cold War-era research facility, nestled in a forgotten valley, rumored to house something. Mason's unit, an elite four-man special forces team, was sent to investigate. They were the best of the best, ghost-like in their stealth, surgical in their precision. They had faced down insurgents, terrorists, and the kind of pure evil that humanity often conjures. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared them for this. The air in the valley was thick, heavy, pressing down on them. A low, guttural growl, too deep for any animal, too feral for any man, echoed through the trees. They moved through the dense undergrowth, their comms crackling with static, their senses screaming. The facility itself was a ruin, overgrown with vines, its concrete bones picked clean by decades of neglect. But inside, something pulsed, a residual energy, cold and ancient. They found the remnants first. Strange, almost ceremonial symbols painted in what looked like dried blood on the crumbling walls, ancient texts scrawled in a language no living man understood. Their lead, Sergeant Reynolds, a man whose calm under fire was legendary, felt it first. A growing unease, a sense of being watched. Then it struck. It wasn't a tactical assault. It wasn't a firefight. It was an ambush of pure, unadulterated nightmare. The creature moved with impossible speed, a blur of shadow and raw power. It burst from the darkness, not through a door, but through a solid concrete wall, tearing through it as if it were cardboard. It was massive, hulking, its form a terrifying mockery of something humanoid, but twisted, disproportionate, unnatural. Its eyes, even in the gloom of the facility, glowed with that same infernal, malevolent crimson. Mason, the sniper, instinctively dropped to a knee, rifle up, muscle memory kicking in. But what do you aim at when your target is a demon? Rounds from their M4s and M249s hammered into its chest, its limbs. The impact was audible, sickening, like hitting solid rock. It didn't flinch, it didn't slow, it roared. A sound that wasn't just noise, but a wave of pure, primal fear that vibrated in Mason's bones. Sergeant Davies, their medic, a man whose hands could stitch a wound in the dark, was the first to fall. The creature lunged, its steel-like claws extended. It moved with such brutal efficiency, such overwhelming force, that Davies didn't even have time to scream. A single swipe and his body was ripped, literally, in half. The image, the spray of blood, the visceral horror, was burned forever into Mason's retinas. Peterson, their heavy weapons specialist, opened up with his saw. A relentless torrent of lead. The creature turned, its head tilting, almost as if assessing the futile attack. It grabbed the machine gun, not the man, but the weapon itself, and crushed it in its monstrous fist like a toy. Then, with a casual flick, it backhanded Peterson, sending him flying into a concrete pillar, his neck snapping with a sickening crack. Reynolds, Mason's team leader, the closest thing he had to a brother, reacted with the cold, controlled fury of a man possessed. He grabbed a satchel charge, armed it, and hurled it at the beast, yelling, "Get out, Mason, get out!" Mason didn't hesitate. It was an order, and more than that, it was a lifeline. He sprinted, the screams of the beast, the roar of Reynolds, the deafening silence of his fallen comrades echoing behind him. He heard the explosion, a concussive blast that shook the very foundations of the mountain, but he didn't look back. He couldn't. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs gave out, until he collapsed in the cold embrace of the Appalachian night, gasping for air, the taste of ash and terror in his mouth. He was the sole survivor. When the recovery team found him days later, half mad with thirst and shock, his story was met with disbelief, then with suspicion. A cover-up was swift and brutal. The facility was declared a hazardous waste site, sealed off, and the entire mission scrubbed from the records. Mason was debriefed, his account dismissed as a stress-induced delusion, the product of trauma. But he knew what he saw. He knew what had killed his brothers. He was offered an honorable discharge, a quiet retirement, a way to disappear. He took it. He retreated, built his fortress of solitude, trying to outrun the phantom screams, the burning eyes. He told himself it was over, that he was safe. But now, sitting in the cold silence of the government car, watching the blurred images on the tablet, the Appalachians rose again in his mind, not as a memory, but as a chilling prophecy. The creature was back. It wasn't just a monster, it was the monster. And it was coming for everyone. Mason Wolfe, the ghost of Fort Bragg, felt the cold touch of destiny. This wasn't just a mission. This was his reckoning. The classified facility was a tomb of glass and steel, buried deep beneath an anonymous federal building in D.C. Its corridors hummed with the low thrum of servers and the hushed whispers of men and women who carried the weight of national security on their shoulders. But when Mason Wolfe walked through its sterile hallways, he carried a different kind of burden, the weight of an impossible truth. He was ushered into a briefing room, stark and uninviting, dominated by a large holographic display flickering with maps, casualty reports, and the chilling enhanced footage of the creature. Around the table sat a grim assembly, General Evans, a man whose face was chiseled from years of command, Dr. Aris Thorne, a leading expert in bioterror, his skepticism a palpable thing, and a handful of other intelligence and military advisors, their faces a mix of exhaustion and barely concealed fear. General Evans, a man Mason respected despite their infrequent terse interactions, nodded a curt greeting. "Captain Wolfe, thank you for coming." His voice was gravelly, tired. "We've reviewed your confidential report from the Appalachian incident. It's unconventional, to say the least." Dr. Thorne, a man of sharp intellect and even sharper cynicism, interjected, his tone edged with barely disguised disdain. "Unconventional, General, is an understatement. We're talking about a report that describes a mythical beast tearing through a special forces unit. Frankly, Captain, with all due respect, it reads like a fever dream. We have credible intel pointing to a highly organized, technologically advanced terror cell, perhaps with some form of biological enhancement. Not werewolves." The last word was spat out, dripping with sarcasm. Mason didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. His gaze, colder than the room's air conditioning, swept over Thorne, then settled on the general. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice a low, even rumble, "I understand your need for quantifiable data, but what you're seeing in those cities, what you're failing to contain, defies every quantifiable metric your science has. I saw it, my team saw it, and they paid the ultimate price because they couldn't conceive of its existence." He stood, walking over to the holographic display, the red eyes of the creature staring out from the projection. "Look at this. The structural damage. Not explosions, not projectiles. Sheer brute force. The power grid failures. Not EMPs. Surgical, localized outages that happen precisely at midnight right before the attacks, as if it's cutting off the lights to set the stage. And the bodies. He paused, the memory of Davies's ripped torso flashing in his mind. No known weapon, no known human could inflict that kind of trauma. Not cleanly, not repeatedly, not across 3 major cities. He turned back to them, his eyes piercing. I'm not here to debate folklore. I'm here to tell you that what you are facing is not human. It is not a terror cell. It is the same entity that wiped out my unit. It moves too fast. It hits too hard. It's intelligent. And it's driven by something beyond simple aggression. The room was silent. Thorne shifted uncomfortably, but his skepticism hadn't entirely dissipated. General Evans, however, looked at Mason with a flicker of understanding, a grudging acceptance of the unbelievable. If what you say is true, Captain, the general said, his voice low, then our conventional approaches are useless. Our best special ops teams are being deployed, but they're going in blind. They'll be massacred, Mason stated flatly. Just like mine were. It laughed at bullets. It ignored explosives. Unless you have a weapon that can put down a supernatural entity, you're just sending more good men to their graves. The realization hung heavy in the air. The futility of their current strategy was stark. The holographic maps continued to flash, indicating projected trajectories for the creature's next potential strike. The third full moon was less than 48 hours away, hanging heavy in the air like a death sentence. So what do we do, Captain? Thorne asked, a hint of desperation now creeping into his voice. If it's not a biological threat, not a human enemy, what then? Mason looked at the glowing red eyes on the screen, then back at the exhausted faces around the table. You look for something outside your textbooks, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Something ancient, something that predates your science. We need answers beyond the conventional. We need to understand what it is, not just that it is. Just as the general was about to speak, a young aide, pale and visibly shaken, entered the room and placed a thick, leather-bound folder on the table in front of General Evans. Sir, this just came in, from a very unusual source, attached to the creature's known migratory patterns. It's a cultural analysis, from an anthropologist specializing in indigenous American folklore. Evans raised an eyebrow, picking up the file. His eyes scanned the first few pages, and a look of surprise, then intrigue, crossed his face. He passed it to Mason without a word. Mason opened it. The title, stark against the aged paper, sent a jolt through him. Project Yaguara, Lore and Prophecies. Beneath it, a name. Tala, Historian, Indigenous Studies. Mason's gaze sharpened. A whisper indeed. A whisper from the old ways. A potential key to understanding the nightmare that now threatened to consume the modern world. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that his path was about to veer sharply from the sterile halls of government into a realm far older, far more dangerous, and far more steeped in forgotten truths. The journey to Tala's remote sanctuary was a descent, not just in altitude, but into a different kind of world. Mason left the steel and glass of DC behind, the urgency of the approaching full moon a silent drumbeat in his chest. His destination was a secluded cabin nestled deep within the Cherokee lands of North Carolina, far from any paved road, a place where the internet was a rumor, and the hum of the forest replaced the city's frantic pulse. He found her living simply, almost primitively, in a home that seemed to have grown organically from the earth itself. It was built of rough-hewn timber and stone, adorned with intricate hand-woven textiles and ancient artifacts, pottery shards, bone carvings, feathered talismans that spoke of generations past. Tala herself was a woman of indeterminate age, her face a tapestry of fine lines, her eyes deep pools of wisdom that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. Her hair, long and braided with strands of silver, framed a face that was both severe and compassionate. She wasn't surprised to see him. She simply watched him approach, her gaze steady, unblinking, as if she had been expecting him all along. Mason, accustomed to directness, felt an unfamiliar awkwardness. "Tala," he began, his voice rough. "My name is Captain Mason Wolfe. I believe you were expecting me." She nodded slowly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "The wind carries whispers, Captain, and the spirit of the land cries out when it is troubled. Come in." Her voice was soft, melodic, yet carried an undeniable authority. Mason stepped across the threshold feeling as if he were entering a sacred space. The air inside was thick with the scent of sage and cedar, and the quiet hum of ancient knowledge. They sat at a simple wooden table, a cup of herbal tea placed before him. Mason didn't waste time. He laid out the bare, brutal facts, the attacks, the creature, the escalating terror, and his own horrifying experience years ago. He spoke of the red eyes, the impossible strength, the way bullets seemed to glance off its hide. Tala listened patiently, her gaze never leaving his face. She didn't interrupt, didn't question, didn't show surprise. When he finished, the silence in the cabin was profound, broken only by the crackle of a small fire in the hearth. "You speak of the Yahguara," she said finally, her voice a low hum. "The corrupted hunter, the spirit of vengeance born from sorrow." Mason leaned forward. "The file mentioned it. A curse, what exactly is it?" Tala picked up a smooth, river-polished stone, turning it in her fingers. "The Yahguara is not merely a beast, Captain. It is a manifestation, a consequence. Our people have legends, stories passed down through countless generations, not just to entertain, but to warn, to remember. There was a time, long ago, when our warriors were pure of heart, protectors of the land and its people. But some were consumed by pride, by greed, by the lust for power. They shed innocent blood, broke sacred vows. They became impure." Her eyes met his, piercing. "The ancient spirits, guardians of the balance, cursed them. When the full moon rose, their corrupted souls would be twisted, transformed into monstrous reflections of their inner darkness. They would become the Yahguara, part man, part beast, driven by a primal rage, a hunger that could never be satisfied." Mason felt a chill. "So it's a form of shapeshifter? A werewolf?" Tala shook her head slowly. "Not in the way your stories portray. It is not simply a man who becomes a wolf. It is a warrior, twisted by his own impurity, embodying the wild, untamed fury of nature, but without its grace or purpose. It is a creature of retribution, a force of consequence." "But this one," Mason pressed, "it's targeting cities. It seems intelligent, calculated, and it's doing more than just killing. It's making a statement." Tala nodded. "That is the critical difference, Captain. Most Yahguara are driven by instinct, by the curse itself. But sometimes, when the line of the cursed one is particularly strong, when their suffering is great, when the injustices against them are profound and generations deep, the creature retains memory. It retains purpose. It becomes a vessel for accumulated grief, for forgotten anger. It becomes a ghost of vengeance, not just a beast." She paused, her gaze distant, as if seeing through time. "The one you faced in the Appalachians, its ancestors were warriors who fought for their land, for their people, against those who came to take everything. They were betrayed, slaughtered, their sacred sites desecrated. Their blood was spilled on polluted ground. Their spirits were never allowed to rest." Mason's mind raced. The Appalachians, the abandoned facility, the ancient symbols. It wasn't a coincidence. "So it's not just attacking indiscriminately. It's seeking retribution?" "Retribution, yes," Tala confirmed, her voice growing grave. "But also acknowledgement. It is howling for the world to remember, to understand the suffering it embodies. This creature carries the pain of its lineage, the weight of a broken promise, the stain of forgotten blood. It is a monster, yes, but it is also a victim of a very old, very cruel history. And it will not stop until its vengeance is complete, or until it is truly laid to rest. The silence returned, heavier this time, imbued with the weight of centuries of injustice. Mason stared at Tala, his cold logic colliding with ancient wisdom. This wasn't just a threat, it was a living, breathing lament. And for the first time he felt not just dread, but a flicker of a different emotion. A terrible, unsettling empathy for the monster. Tala's words hung in the air, a chilling reminder that the beast was not merely a beast. It carried the memories of its human lineage, and it was fueled by generations of forgotten injustices. The air in Tala's cabin grew thick with the scent of dried herbs and the dust of forgotten history. For hours Mason listened, his initial skepticism slowly eroding under the undeniable weight of Tala's knowledge. She didn't just tell him stories. She painted a mosaic of a world far older, far more complex than his military mind had ever conceived. The Yahguara, Tala explained, her fingers tracing patterns in the air, is bound by certain laws, ancient truths woven into the fabric of creation. It is powerful, yes, but not invincible. Its strength is its weakness, its rage, its blind spot. Mason leaned forward, his voice low, urgent. What are its weaknesses? How do we stop it? Its connection to its human past, Tala began, is a double-edged sword. While it gives it purpose, it also leaves a sliver of vulnerability. The metal of the earth, refined in fire, then blessed by the ancestors. Silver. Not just any silver, Captain. Silver that has been honored, imbued with purpose. She rose and walked to a wooden chest, its surface worn smooth by time. From within, she carefully unwrapped a bundle of cloth, revealing a small collection of objects. A tarnished silver medallion, a delicate silver earring, and a broken, silver-handled ceremonial knife. Each piece, though small, radiated a quiet power, a sense of sacredness. These, Tala said, her voice reverent, are remnants, from my family, from our sacred places. They hold the prayers of our ancestors, the strength of generations. To defeat a Yahguara, you need to disrupt its essence, not just its physical form. Its rage protects it. But ancestral silver, it speaks to the hidden humanity within, the part that yearns for peace, for rest. It is a true death, a severing of the curse itself. Mason looked at the small, seemingly fragile pieces of silver. He, a man of modern ballistics and high-tech weaponry, was being told that his only hope lay in ancient trinkets. The absurdity was not lost on him, but neither was the desperate hope. We need a bullet, Mason stated, his mind already calculating trajectories, impact points. A single precise strike. Tala nodded. One shot, aimed at the heart. It must be forged with intention, with purpose. It must carry the weight of both your need to end its rampage and the ancestral yearning for peace. The process was a strange fusion of old and new. Mason, through his government contacts, arranged for a clandestine portable forge to be brought to Tala's isolated cabin. The scientists and metallurgists who arrived were baffled, their expressions a mix of confusion and thinly veiled condescension. Tala, however, moved with an unshakable solemnity. She melted down the sacred silver pieces, carefully guiding the molten metal into a specially crafted mold. As the silver cooled, she murmured ancient chants, her hands hovering over the hardening slug, imbuing it with prayers, with intentions. Mason watched, fascinated, as the silver seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. It must be pure, Tala explained, her eyes fixed on the cooling metal. Pure in composition, pure in intent. It is not just about the metal. It is about the spirit you put into it, the spirit of release. When the bullet was finally forged, it was unlike any other. It gleamed with an ethereal luster, its surface subtly marked with faint, almost invisible lines that seemed to echo Tala's ancient symbols. It was heavy, weighted with history, with purpose. Mason carefully placed it into a special single-round chamber within his sniper rifle's magazine, the only one he would carry. As the last rays of sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues. General Evans's voice crackled over a secure satellite phone. Captain Wolf. Intelligence confirms the creature's trajectory. It's heading for Chicago. Mass evacuations are underway, but the window is closing. It's almost midnight. The third full moon rises in less than 2 hours. Tala looked at Mason, her eyes grave. The Yaguara seeks a stage, Captain. A place of deep symbolic meaning where its voice can be heard by many. Chicago. It is a city of wind, of power, of concrete canyons built upon the bones of ancient lands. Perfect canvas for its final act of vengeance. Mason felt a grim determination settle in his gut. The silver bullet, heavy in his chamber, felt like the weight of destiny. He had walked among ghosts for too long. Now, it was time to put one to rest. He nodded, turning to the waiting chopper. The Yaguara had picked its stage, and Mason Wolf, armed with ancient magic and modern precision, was about to play his part. The wind of Chicago, usually a playful, blustery companion, howled like a banshee through the city's deserted canyons. It carried the scent of rain and fear, an oppressive blanket settling over the metropolis. This wasn't the vibrant, bustling Chicago Mason Wolf remembered. This was a ghost town, a concrete corpse. The creature had arrived with a brutal efficiency that defied human comprehension. Its methodical dismantling of the city's infrastructure was a horrifying display of intelligence. First, the communications grid went dark, isolating pockets of the city, severing the lifelines of information. Then, like a series of falling dominoes, the power grids buckled. Skyscrapers, once glittering beacons of commerce, became towering shadows, their windows black eyes staring blankly at the rising full moon. The city was plunged into a primal darkness, illuminated only by the frantic flashes of emergency vehicles and the occasional distant glow of an exploding transformer. Mass evacuations had been ordered, a desperate last-ditch effort. Highways out of the city were clogged with abandoned cars, their owners having fled on foot, leaving everything behind. The fear was a palpable thing, a collective scream that resonated in the hollow silence. Only the National Guard and a handful of hardened law enforcement personnel remained, their faces grim, their weapons futile against the impossible enemy. They moved like shadows, their movements tentative, their eyes constantly scanning the dark, towering structures, half expecting to see those glowing red eyes at every turn. Mason's team, a small, hand-picked unit of hardened special forces operators who were told just enough to follow orders without question, moved through the abandoned streets in an armored vehicle, its headlights cutting through the oppressive gloom. The city was a labyrinth of shadows, of echoing footsteps, of the chilling sound of the wind. Every turn felt like entering a new, deeper layer of a nightmare. "Reports coming in, Captain," a young comms officer, Specialist Miller, whispered, his voice tight with tension. "Disturbances near the loop, multiple casualties, it's moving fast, too fast for patrols to intercept." Mason's gaze was fixed on the shifting shadows outside. He saw the evidence of the creature's passage, overturned vehicles, twisted metal, the grotesque remains of a traffic light pole snapped clean in half. This wasn't a rampaging animal. This was a force of nature, directed by a terrifying intellect. "It's not just moving randomly," Mason stated, his voice low, almost meditative. "It's not just causing chaos. It has a destination, a purpose." Tala said it seeks a stage. They bypassed deserted tourist districts, navigated through the eerie silence of once bustling financial centers. The only light came from the increasingly bright full moon, now a colossal, malevolent eye staring down at the stricken city. It was under this cold, unforgiving light that they finally saw it. A monstrous silhouette, impossibly tall, unnaturally agile, leaped across a chasm between two skyscrapers, landing with a ground-shaking thud on the adjacent rooftop. Its form was unmistakable, the matted fur, the hulking shoulders, the glint of those wicked claws. It stood there for a moment, a terrifying sentinel against the pale moonlight, its head cocked as if listening to the terrified silence of the city. Then, with a chilling sense of purpose, it moved again, disappearing into the shadows. "It's heading north," Miller reported, his voice strained. "Towards the Adler Planetarium? No, wait. The old observatory, on the lakefront." Mason felt a jolt of recognition. The Adler Planetarium, a landmark dedicated to the cosmos, and the observatory, a place where humanity reached for the stars. A stage indeed, a place where the vastness of the universe met the fragile, fleeting nature of human existence. A perfect spot for a creature that embodied ancient curses and cosmic rage to make its final statement. He gripped the custom-made sniper rifle that lay across his lap, its single silver bullet a heavy metallic promise. The creature was drawing them in, leading them to its chosen ground. It was a hunter, yes, but it was also a lure. And Mason, the ghost of Appalachia, was about to step into its trap. The hunt had begun, not in the wilderness, but in the heart of a fallen city. The armored vehicle lurched to a halt 3 blocks from the old observatory, the strategic decision made to approach on foot. The engine cut, plunging them into a profound silence broken only by the incessant wail of the wind and the distant sporadic crump of collapsing infrastructure. This was a hunter's silence, tense and electric. Mason's team disembarked. Specialist Miller, the comms expert, his face pale but determined. Sergeant Rojas, a veteran pointman, his movements fluid and watchful. And Corporal Chen, the medic, her medical kit now feeling terribly inadequate. They were a small, capable unit, but Mason knew they were little more than bait, distractions. The real fight, the one that mattered, would be his alone. "Stay sharp," Mason's voice was a low, guttural whisper, barely audible above the wind. "Eyes and ears, no heroics. Your job is to keep me alive until I get the shot." They moved through the darkened streets, a creeping procession of shadows against the oppressive gloom. Every alley felt like a potential ambush, every overturned car a hiding place. The air was thick with the acrid scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and sickening, a smell that Mason knew from Appalachia, the scent of freshly spilled blood. They found the first signs of the creature's passage in a desecrated park, trees ripped from their roots, a playground twisted into unrecognizable scrap metal, and then the bodies. Several police officers, their forms mangled beyond recognition, their weapons shattered beside them. This wasn't just a monster, it was a force of calculated destruction, designed to intimidate, to spread terror. Rojas, ever vigilant, pointed to a series of deep gouges on the side of a concrete building. "Claw marks, Captain, fresh. Goes up 5 stories. Mason looked up. The creature wasn't just walking. It was scaling buildings, moving across rooftops with a terrifying agility that belied its immense size. It was using the city's verticality to its advantage, watching them, toying with them. They pressed on, the silence punctuated by the distant sounds of the creature's rampage. A sudden, ear-splitting roar that shook the very foundations of the buildings, followed by the crashing of glass and the sickening sound of crumbling concrete. It was close. Too close. Suddenly, Miller, the comms officer, gasped. "Captain, visual, southeast corner, 60 meters. Mason dropped, rifle up, peering through the scope. There it was. The hulking silhouette, standing atop a pedestrian bridge, framed by the pale, accusing light of the full moon. Its crimson eyes, even from this distance, seemed to burn with an unholy intensity. It looked down at them, a predator surveying its prey, a chilling sense of awareness in its posture. Mason's finger twitched on the trigger, but it wasn't the shot. Not yet. This was too open, too exposed. The creature knew they were there. It was luring them, drawing them into its preferred killing ground. The creature didn't attack directly. Instead, it turned and leaped, covering the entire length of the bridge in a single, impossible bound, landing on a building across the street with a seismic thud that rattled their teeth. It then tore through the building's facade, disappearing inside, leaving a gaping hole in its wake. "It's playing with us," Chen whispered, her voice tight with a fear she fought to control. "It knows we're coming," Mason confirmed, rising cautiously. It knows what it wants, and it wants us at its stage. They continued their grim pursuit, the creature leading them on a twisted path through the darkened city. They skirted shattered storefronts, waded through knee-deep water from burst fire hydrants, and navigated around the wreckage of overturned vehicles. Each step brought them closer to the observatory, closer to the source of the monster's power, closer to the final confrontation. Mason's mind was a maelstrom of memories. Davies, Peterson, Reynolds, their faces flashing before his eyes, their dying screams echoing in his ears. This wasn't just about saving Chicago. It was about laying their ghosts to rest. He checked the silver bullet in his rifle, its cool weight a tangible promise. This was it. The final act. The creature seemed to be toying with them, drawing them deeper into the heart of the city, towards a specific, unsettling destination. The final stretch to the observatory was a descent into an unholy quiet. The sounds of the creature's rampage had faded, replaced by an eerie, profound silence that felt more terrifying than any roar. It was the silence of a place that had just witnessed unspeakable horrors, a hallowed space now desecrated. The old observatory, a dome-topped edifice of stone and glass designed to gaze at the heavens, stood stark against the moonlit skyline, a black silhouette against a sky that seemed to hold its breath. As Mason and his team approached, the full scale of the creature's recent atrocities became chillingly clear. The grand entrance, once a welcoming portal to cosmic wonders, was a gaping maw of twisted metal and shattered stone. The sturdy iron gates were ripped from their moorings, flung aside like discarded toys. Emergency vehicles, their lights still flickering weakly, lay overturned and crushed, their forms grotesque monuments to the violence that had erupted there. "My God," Miller whispered, his voice barely audible, his eyes wide with horror. The ground was littered with bodies, not just the fallen security personnel, but also civilians, caught in the creature's path during the hurried evacuations. They lay in unnatural positions, limbs contorted, torsos rent open. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood, the coppery scent overwhelming, clinging to their clothes, invading their nostrils. It was a charnel house, a grim altar to the creature's unholy hunger. Mason's face was a mask of granite, but his jaw was clenched so tight his teeth ached. This wasn't just chaos. It was a calculated display of power, a grotesque monument built from human suffering. The creature wanted to be seen. It wanted its message delivered. They moved with extreme caution, navigating the debris, their boots crunching on broken glass and spent casings. Rojas, ever the point man, gestured towards the main observatory building. Tracks, big ones, straight for the dome. The creature wasn't hiding. It was waiting. They entered the building, the grand foyer now a scene of utter devastation. Telescopes, once symbols of human curiosity and scientific endeavor, lay shattered on the marble floor, their lenses cracked, their polished brass forms bent into abstract sculptures of destruction. Display cases were smashed, their contents, ancient astronomical instruments, meteorite fragments, scattered like dust. It's almost like it wanted to destroy everything we look up to, Chen murmured, her voice hollow. Mason didn't respond. He followed the monstrous tracks which led directly to the central spiraling staircase, up towards the dome, towards the celestial sphere. It was the creature's stage. They ascended slowly, each step heavy with dread. The stairs were slick with something dark, something Mason didn't want to identify. The air grew colder, thinner, filled with the eerie silence that follows a storm of violence. The only light now came from the moon, piercing through the shattered windows of the dome, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters. As they reached the top, the panoramic view of the devastated city spread out beneath them, a stark testament to the creature's wrath. And then, Mason saw it. It stood in the center of the shattered observatory dome, silhouetted against the vast, star-strewn sky. Massive, hulking, its fur, dark and matted, seemed to absorb the moonlight, making it a void against the constellations. Its claws, long and razor-sharp, glinted like polished steel. It wasn't moving. It was simply standing there, a monstrous statue of vengeance, surrounded by the wreckage it had wrought. But it wasn't facing the city. It was facing them. As Mason raised his rifle, the creature slowly turned its head, its crimson eyes, those burning pinpricks of malevolent light, locking onto him. There was no rage in its gaze, no animalistic fury. There was something else, something ancient, something knowing. It was as if it had anticipated Mason's arrival, as if it had been waiting for him specifically, for this final confrontation. The air crackled with an unspoken challenge. The final dance was about to begin. The wind howled through the shattered dome of the observatory, a chilling chorus for the confrontation about to unfold. Mason stood at the precipice of his own nightmare, the silver bullet a cold promise in the chamber of his rifle. His team, spread out behind him, provided cover, but their purpose was nominal. This was a duel, an echo of ancient battles, fought on the highest point of a broken city, under the full, unforgiving gaze of the moon. The Yaguara stood motionless, a hulking, terrifying sculpture against the backdrop of infinity. Its red eyes, unwavering, were fixed on Mason, burning with an intelligence that defied its monstrous form. This wasn't a beast. It was a conscious entity, one that seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, the ritualistic nature of their impending clash. Mason took a deep breath, the cold night air filling his lungs, the scent of blood and ozone burning his nostrils. Every instinct, every fiber of his being screamed at him to run, to flee this impossible horror. But the faces of his fallen comrades, Davies, Peterson, Reynolds, flashed before his eyes, fueling a different kind of resolve. This wasn't just about survival. It was about honoring their sacrifice. It was about ending this. He raised his rifle slowly, deliberately, the custom-made weapon feeling like an extension of his own arm. His training kicked in, an automatic response honed over decades of high-stakes missions. He ignored the trembling in his hands, ignored the drumming of his own heart. The world narrowed to the scope, to the target. The creature's chest, massive and armored by matted fur and taut muscle, filled his vision. He focused on the area where a heart should be, a single vital point. Tala's words echoed in his mind. A single precise strike at the heart. It must carry the weight of both your need to end its rampage and the ancestral yearning for peace. The Yaguara made no sound, no aggressive move. It simply watched, its head slightly tilted, almost in anticipation. It was a terrifying display of confidence, of power. It knew what Mason carried, what he intended, and it seemed to invite it. Mason's finger slowly, almost imperceptibly, tightened on the trigger. He felt the cold steel against his skin, the familiar resistance of the mechanism. The moon illuminated the scope's reticle, a faint crosshair settling over the creature's chest. He remembered the Appalachian ambush, the raw terror, the impossible speed, the way his comrades were ripped apart. He remembered the feeling of helplessness, the desperate scramble for survival. That beast had been a whirlwind of death. This one was different. It was still, waiting, challenging him. A bead of sweat trickled down Mason's temple despite the chilling wind. The silence stretched, elongated, weighted by the enormity of the moment. It was a dance between predator and prey, but the roles felt strangely reversed. Was he the hunter, or was he being hunted? Was this the final confrontation, or just another act in a much larger, more ancient drama? His breathing was shallow, controlled. His focus, absolute. He could hear the faint, rapid heartbeat of Miller, Rojas, and Chen behind him, their collective tension a palpable thing. They were just as terrified, just as desperate for this to end. Then, just as his finger tightened the last fraction of an inch, just as the mechanism was about to engage, a flicker. The creature's immense form seemed to shimmer, its monstrous outline wavering for a fraction of a second. Its burning red eyes, those malevolent pinpricks of light, softened. For a fleeting, impossible instant, the raw, animalistic fury vanished, replaced by something human, a profound sadness, an ancient weariness. It was the gaze of a man, not a beast, filled with a sorrow that transcended time, a pain Mason recognized as deeply, terribly familiar. It was the flicker of the human soul trapped within the monster, the one Tala had spoken of, the one yearning for release. This was the moment he had to take it. But what was it truly that he was about to extinguish? Was it just a monster, or was it something more tragic, something that carried the echoes of an unbearable past? The tension was almost unbearable. He had one chance, and in that one chance, he saw a reflection of himself, a man burdened by secrets and scars staring back from the eyes of the beast. The world seemed to shrink, compressing into a single razor-thin point. Mason's eye fixed to the scope, the silver bullet poised for release, and the haunting, shifting gaze of the jaguara. The human flicker in its eyes intensified, a brief, agonizing moment of clarity in the midst of the monstrous. Then an impossible sound. Not a roar, not a growl, but a voice. Deep, resonant, yet laced with an agonizing fragility, as if centuries of unspeakable pain were compressed into a single utterance. It was the voice of a man, choked with a sorrow that went beyond simple regret, beyond the rage that had driven its rampage. "You don't understand." The words were a ragged whisper, torn from a throat designed for guttural roars. The creature's head dipped slightly, almost in a gesture of profound weariness, or perhaps a final, desperate plea. Its eyes, still burning red, now held a glint of something akin to tears. "I'm not alone." The confession hung in the air, a chilling revelation that shattered Mason's carefully constructed understanding. Not alone. What did that mean? Another creature? A lineage? A deeper, more intricate conspiracy? The thought, raw and terrifying, sent a cold spike of dread through his heart. But there was no time to process, no time to question. The moment was upon him. His finger, already tightening, completed its action. The click of the trigger was almost imperceptible in the howling wind. The muzzle flash was a brief, blinding bloom in the darkness, followed by the sharp crack of the rifle shot, a sound that echoed like a thunderclap across the silent, devastated city. The silver bullet, blessed by ancient spirits and guided by Mason's unwavering precision, found its mark. It struck the creature's chest with a sickening thud, a dull, heavy impact that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the observatory. The jaguara stiffened. Its colossal frame lurched backward, a jolt that shook the entire dome. The burning red in its eyes flared, then dimmed like dying embers. A low, guttural gasp, unlike any sound Mason had ever heard, escaped its lips, a sound of agony, of release, of something ancient finally succumbing. Then, the disintegration began. It wasn't a collapse. It wasn't a fall. It was a horrifying, rapid unmaking. The creature's form began to contort, its powerful muscles seizing, its matted fur dissolving. It twisted violently, as if caught in an unseen vortex, its monstrous features melting away. A dark, acrid smoke began to pour from its dissolving body, thick and oily, smelling of decay and something else. Something ancient and metallic, like rusted blood. The smoke enveloped it, coiling and swirling, consuming the last vestiges of its terrifying form. Its screams, if it made any, were swallowed by the crackling of its dissolving flesh, the rush of the smoke. It writhed, a fleeting silhouette in the choking blackness, a shadow tearing itself apart. In seconds, it was gone. The smoke dissipated as quickly as it had appeared, carried away by the relentless Chicago wind, leaving no trace behind. No body, no blood, no ash. Nothing but the shattered remnants of the observatory, the chilling silence and the lingering scent of something deeply, profoundly unnatural. The ground where it had stood was clean, as if the creature had never existed. Mason lowered his rifle, his arms trembling, not from recoil, but from the shock of what he had just witnessed. The silence was absolute, a void left in the wake of such a violent, impossible end. His team, initially frozen in awe and horror, slowly began to move, their faces pale, their eyes wide with disbelief. He had done it. The creature was gone. The attacks would cease. The curse was broken. But the chilling whisper echoed in his mind, persistent, unsettling. "You don't understand. I'm not alone." The creature's body had vanished, leaving only a lingering question mark in the chilling empty air. The silence that followed the creature's dissolution was not a comforting peace, but a heavy, almost suffocating void. The wind still howled through the shattered observatory dome, but now it sounded like a mournful lament, a whisper of secrets carried away by the night. Mason stood amidst the wreckage, his rifle still clutched in his numb hands, the scent of ozone and something indescribably unnatural clinging to the air. The jaguara was gone, but its final words, a chilling, desperate plea, echoed in the hollow space of his mind. "You don't understand. I'm not alone." The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights, frantic voices, and the methodical efficiency of a government trying desperately to restore order and control the narrative. General Evans arrived, his face a mix of grim relief and profound bewilderment. He walked the perimeter of the dome, his eyes scanning the impossible wreckage, the absence of a body. "What was it, Captain?" he asked, his voice low, almost reverent. "What exactly did you just put down?" Mason looked at him, his gaze distant. "Something ancient, General, something that shouldn't exist." He didn't elaborate, couldn't. How do you explain a centuries-old curse, ancestral vengeance, and a creature that dissolves into black smoke? The official story was crafted with a swift, brutal efficiency. The media, hungry for answers, was fed a carefully constructed narrative. A highly coordinated, extremely violent extremist group, using experimental biological agents and advanced psychological warfare tactics, had been responsible for the attacks. A specially trained government unit had engaged and neutralized the threat. The blackouts were attributed to sophisticated cyber attacks. The bodies, well, they were casualties of a ruthless enemy. It was a tidy, palatable lie, designed to soothe a terrified populace and restore a semblance of order. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief. Cities slowly began to hum back to life. The fear, though lingering, began to recede, replaced by a grateful embrace of normalcy. Heroes were declared, nameless, faceless operatives of a shadowy government agency. But Mason Wolfe was not among them. He refused any commendations, any public acknowledgement. The idea of being paraded as a hero for killing a tormented, vengeful ghost that whispered of being not alone felt grotesque. He slipped away as quietly as he had arrived, a ghost returning to his self-imposed exile. He wanted no part of the medals, the speeches, the carefully curated falsehoods. The accolades felt like a betrayal of the truth he now carried, a truth too dark and too unsettling for public consumption. He returned to his cabin in the pines, but the quiet was different now. It was no longer a sanctuary, but a canvas for the lingering echo of that final whisper. He walked the familiar trails, cleaned his rifle, performed his rituals, but the inner peace he had once sought remained elusive. The creature was dead. The attacks had ceased, but a new, unsettling question festered in his mind. Not alone. What did it mean? Was there another? Was it a warning of a larger, unseen war? The absence of a body, the complete dissolution, gnawed at him. There was no proof, no evidence, just a gaping hole where a monster once was, and a whisper that hinted at a truth far more terrifying than the one he had confronted. He spent days grappling with the impossible, the scientific mind fighting against the ancient lore Tala had shared. He had killed the beast, yes, but had he truly understood it? Had he merely silenced one voice in a chorus he couldn't yet hear? The thought was a constant low thrum beneath the surface of his consciousness. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the story wasn't truly over. Not for him. Not as long as that whisper lingered, a chilling echo in the quiet of his solitude. He knew there was still a piece of the puzzle missing. He had to seek out Tala one final time. The drive back to Tala's cabin felt different this time. The weight of the world, though still present, had shifted. The immediate terror of the Yaguara's rampage was gone, replaced by a deeper, more profound sense of unease, a silent, unsettling question that echoed Mason's own thoughts. Not alone. Tala greeted him with the same quiet knowing, her eyes holding neither surprise nor judgment. She simply poured him a cup of hot, fragrant tea, and they sat in companionable silence, the warmth of the hearth chasing away the chill of the Carolina night. Mason finally broke the silence, his voice raw. "It said something, Tala. Before it dissolved. It said, 'You don't understand. I'm not alone.'" He looked at her, his gaze pleading for answers. What did it mean? Is there another? Is this a lineage? Tala's gaze was distant, thoughtful. She stirred her tea slowly, her movements deliberate as if weighing each word before it left her lips. "The Yaguara is a curse of the blood, Captain. It runs through specific lines. Not all warriors become the monster, only those whose souls are impure, those who break sacred vows, and not every moon brings a transformation. The curse itself is tied to the strength of the moon, to the land, to the unquiet spirits of the past." She paused, then continued, her voice lower, more somber. "But the one you faced, it was the last of its kind, the final corrupted remnant of that specific lineage. Its bloodline, its particular chain of suffering and vengeance, has been severed. Its curse, as it manifested in that form, is truly ended." A wave of relief, potent and overwhelming, washed over Mason. He had done it. He had truly ended it. But the relief was short-lived, replaced by Tala's next words. "However," she continued, her eyes meeting his, "the Yaguara, especially one that carried generations of memory, was not merely a monster. It was a guardian of secrets, a dark repository of knowledge, the one you faced. It held a history not just of its own suffering, but of those who inflicted that suffering, of the forces that moved in the shadows, creating the conditions for such curses to take root." She reached into a small leather pouch at her side and pulled out a tarnished silver medallion, worn smooth by centuries of handling. It was intricately carved with symbols Mason didn't recognize, symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, ancient energy. "This," she said, pressing it into his hand, "is a protective amulet. From my ancestors. Wear it. Not for the Yaguara, but for what its words imply." Mason looked at the medallion, then at Tala. "Secrets? What secrets?" Tala's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile that didn't quite reach her ancient eyes. "The curse was ended, Captain. That is true. But the secrets it held, they are not." She gestured vaguely to the night sky beyond the window, to the calm, full moon now shining peacefully. "You have seen the darkness that men create. You have seen what forgotten injustices can spawn. The Yaguara was a symptom, a consequence, not the root cause." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper, filled with a gravitas that sent a chill down Mason's spine. "There are others, Captain. Not like the Yaguara, perhaps, but other manifestations, other ancient forces, dormant for centuries, now stirring. The world is changing. The veil between what you call reality and what our people have always known to be true, it is thinning. What you faced was a warning, a harbinger." Mason felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. He had thought this was over. He had thought he could return to his quiet solitude, to the ghosts he knew. But Tala was telling him that he had merely scratched the surface, that he had opened a door to a much larger, much more terrifying reality. The Yaguara, in its dying breath, hadn't warned him of another monster, but of a deeper, more insidious truth. A web of ancient machinations, hidden powers, and forgotten injustices that continued to shape the world. He looked at the medallion in his hand, its cool metal a tangible reminder of the impossible. Tala's words echoed in his mind, unsettling and profound. The curse was ended, but the secrets it held, they were not. He stood, the weight of this new, terrifying knowledge settling on his shoulders. He had killed a monster, but he had opened his eyes to a world far more dangerous, far more mysterious than he could have ever imagined. He nodded to Tala, a silent farewell, a silent acknowledgement of the path that now lay before him. He was a hunter of shadows, and the hunt, it seemed, was far from over. Mason Wolfe walked away from Tala's cabin and back into the world, but it was a world forever altered. The familiar hum of the highway felt strangely muted, the distant city lights a stark, almost fragile glow against the vast, indifferent darkness of the night. He had sought anonymity, buried himself in self-imposed exile, hoping to outrun the ghosts that haunted him. Now, he carried new ones and a heavier burden of knowledge. The news cycle moved on, as it always does. The extremist group responsible for the Chicago attacks faded into the background. Another tragedy filed away, neatly explained. Mason, true to his word, disappeared. He refused the accolades, the hushed whispers of commendation, the attempts to bring him back into the fold of official operations. He simply vanished, a shadow among shadows, untraceable, unreachable. He returned to his cabin, but the solitude no longer felt like a retreat. It felt like a vigil. He spent his days in a quiet rhythm of self-discipline, of honing skills he now knew he would need again. His rifle, once a tool for the past, was now a preparation for the future. The silver medallion Tala had given him remained cool against his skin, a constant, tangible reminder of the impossible truth he carried. Nights were different. The full moon, once a harbinger of terror, now shone with a quiet, almost melancholic glow. The attacks had indeed ceased. The immediate threat, the screaming, tearing beast, was gone. But Mason's sleep was still troubled, not by the jaguar's roars, but by its dying whisper. "You don't understand. I'm not alone." He would sit by his window, watching the moonlight filter through the pines, and his mind would wander. He would remember Tala's words about the thinning veil, about ancient forces stirring. He would replay the creature's last human gaze, the profound sadness in its eyes before it dissolved into nothingness. Was it pity for him? Was it a warning? The world believed it was safe. It believed the terror had been contained, neutralized. Mason knew better. He knew that the jaguar was merely one manifestation, one symptom, of a much deeper malady, a world where the lines between myth and reality were blurring, where forgotten histories were reawakening with terrifying force. He was no longer just a sniper, a soldier. He was a witness, a sentinel. He had glimpsed the true nature of the darkness that festered beneath the surface of modern life, a darkness born of ancient injustices and unquiet spirits. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that his unique brand of expertise would be called upon again, perhaps not by a government, but by the very forces of chaos and order themselves. The moon, full and serene, continued its silent journey across the sky. This time it was calm, but Mason Wolfe, the man who had seen the impossible and lived to carry its secrets, knew that calm was often just the silence before the next storm. And he would be ready. For the secrets, as Tala said, were not ended. They were merely waiting.